I guess it was around April, where you wrote something where it's like, hey, you know, here are 11 things, you know, that I learned and that I want to share. And that led to this keynote where you basically took those and shared it with thousands of people in a huge audience. So, so I'd love to kind of go through those 11 things. I kind of printed them out.
Yeah, and I was going to say that post actually came about, you know, I struggled with whether or not to publish that post initially, because I was like, you know, it's too personal, and I was also very, you know, you had said that you know, most people, even though I had, you know, talked about CJ before, that a lot of people, you know, probably didn't know the totality of it. And a friend of mine from the industry at one point had come up to visit me, like at my home, and he had met CJ. And we were sitting on the back porch, and he was looking at me weird, you know, to the point that you feel it. And I looked over at him and I said, "What? Why are you looking at me like that?" And he said, "You know, I always knew that he was severely multiply handicapped. You had talked about it." And he said, "But I didn't know he was as bad as he is." He goes, "Because you just, you know, you never seem depressed about it. You just kind of seem like, you know, this is what it is, and just move forward." And, you know, so I guess he thought, I guess seeing it on his end just kind of made him, you know, kind of get the totality of how disabled he was. And so after he passed away, I kind of sat down, and in trying to make some sense of it, you know, well, you know, why would this have happened to him in the first place? I think that's anger you never get rid of, by the way. But why would this have happened to him in the first place? You know, and I knew that he had a huge effect on everything around him, but I kind of wanted to really pinpoint what it was. And I think at the same time, I was trying to almost remind myself of all the reasons that he was behind my drive. Because again, you know, losing that, it was like I wanted something that was, you know, actually written down that I could look at and go, you know, no, be reminded these are the things he actually taught you. So I'm sorry, you said you
and that's what led to you sort of like starting to write this thing.
Yes, and same thing, that post came out fairly quick. And, you know, like I said, the only reason I struggled with publishing it was because it was so personal. And I was really concerned with, I didn't want, I was walking a very fine line between honoring his memory and it seeming like, you know, it was somehow being intertwined in my marketing almost. I don't know if that makes sense. And so I kind of struggled with it. And then I thought, you know, the best thing that I can do to honor him from this point forward and to honor his life is to make sure that all of the things that he taught me and all of the things that I then, you know, was able to put onto other people, that continues. And I didn't want, you know, I always call it a ripple effect because, you know, his stone got thrown in the water. And I just kind of look at it like, I don't ever want that ripple to stop. I want him to be like a constant stone going into the water. And so that was, you know, one of the reasons that I wrote that post and did that keynote, because I feel that the more people that learn his lessons, the more impact his life had while he was here, and the more meaning what he went through had.
Yeah, I mean, and it helps you process, but at the same time, it also, it was powerful. So let's actually go through this, because I mean, it's 11 ideas basically. And we've talked about a number of them in different ways, but your first one was not everything in life goes according to plan.
Yeah, you know, if you had asked me when I was 16, you know, if the plan was to be 21 with a severely multiply handicapped kid and then by the age of 27 be a single mom to 3, my answer probably would have been no. So, you know, I think not focusing on the fact that life didn't turn out how it was supposed to was what allowed me to be able to move past it. And you know, I've unfortunately seen, I've come into contact with a lot of parents of kids like my son, and you know, a lot move on and a lot hold on to the fact that the way their life was supposed to be was taken away from them. And so I think that was absolutely instrumental, you know, being able to adapt and basically go, okay, I thought reality was going to be A, but reality is B. I have 2 choices. B can either suck or I can make the best of B. And so I kind of took the route that, you know, shit did not go according to plan, and I just needed to accept that and kind of move forward. And I think that, you know, if you're unwilling to accept the fact that life isn't always fair and that everything doesn't always go the way that you want it to.
You can have a tough life no matter what.
Exactly.
Right.
I think no matter whether your challenges on the grand scheme of things are here or here, if you can't accept the fact that things may not always go the way that you envision them to go. And in business, you know, one of the ways that I've always been able to apply that is kind of the same thing in business. You know, you can have, I'm sorry?
No, exactly.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you can have the best business plan. It doesn't matter what you have down on paper. You know, it matters what happens the next week. Google, you know, I have the best plan for running an SEO agency. Google comes out and says, oh, big update. We're taking away your keywords. It's kind of like you have to learn how to adapt. And unless you do that, you know, you're never going to be in a good spot where you're kind of happy with life.
And what's interesting, I mean, we're talking about it in the context of, you know, like negative stuff can happen and you have to, you know, figure out how to roll with that. The interesting thing is I've also seen the opposite of that, which is that positive stuff throws itself in your way, but you're so focused on the plan that you laid out that you're like, no. And you refuse to act on it or see it. And you just stay in this linear, like, middle ground. So it's interesting. I think it can happen in both ways. And it's like the notion of adaptability. It's just universally, whether it's something incredible that drops into your lap or something, you know, seemingly horrific, you know, that you got to choose to abandon the plan, or else if you stay locked in it, essentially you stay locked in hell.
Exactly, and I don't think anybody's life is going to go according to a master plan. No. So I think fighting that, and like you said, you know, you miss opportunities just as much as you don't see. I try to look at every obstacle that I come across as being something that's there for some reason to teach me something, you know, or to move me in a certain direction. So if I'm walking down 8th Avenue and there's construction there and a blockade, I try and think there's some reason I'm supposed to be on 9th Avenue instead. And that's kind of, you know, in that point, I think it was number 11, in that point, you know, it was just one of the things that I learned from him was just, it wasn't always going to go according to plan, and I needed to adapt if I wanted to be happy.
So your next one was complaining changes nothing, action changes everything. Yeah,
I mean, you know, your first thought when you get the diagnosis that we got, you know, I'm sure there's a lot, you think, why him? Like, absolutely, like, why is this happening to him? But, you know, my opinion is most people are lying if they don't also say why, you know, also admit the fact that they said, why me? You know, why did this happen to him? Why did it happen to me? Like, what, you know, and it's one of those things you're looking like, what did I do? You know, for him to have to go through this and for me to have to go through this. And I meet a lot of people, you know, that constantly just, you know, they want to complain about everything that they ever come across in their life. You know, they find a way to complain about it. And it just doesn't change anything. It's one of those things, you know, I could have complained about the fact that there were no other parents out there for me to talk to. And, you know, this is so hard because I have to go through it myself. You know, and instead I created the support group to kind of try and bring a bunch of us together. I think that complaining makes you a victim. And I think that acting rather than complaining puts you back in control of the situation. And I'm a little bit of a control freak. Anybody who knows me might be kind of shocked by that admission. But, you know, I think one of the big things in my situation, or when unexpected things come up, is you feel like you're not in control. And that's one of the things that I had to battle when he was diagnosed, was, you know, having absolutely no control over the cause, but I did have control over my reaction. And so I had the choice to either complain about what a tough life I had and what a tough life he had and why this was unfair, and you know, or just kind of move forward with it and try and find what I could do to make the situation better. And you know, he did the same thing. It's kind of like he could have been a really miserable kid, or he could have been a really happy kid. And he was a really happy kid, like smiled all the time. So I think that it was just kind of like, well, if he can smile throughout all this, I think that I can find ways to take action to kind of move forward versus wallowing in it.
Yeah, no, completely. So the next thing you wrote was, your situation does not determine your result, your attitude does.
Yeah, you know, and so I grew up in I would say probably most people would consider my parents upper middle class. You know, they were professionals as far as, you know, their jobs. And, you know, unfortunately, my mom has a lot of issues, and my stepfather was manic depressive. My dad had his own issues, and I ended up in foster care at 14. I was on my own by the time that I was 17. And it's kind of like, I feel like if I had sat on the system for the rest of my life and ate bonbons and watched Jerry Springer, that nobody would have blamed me. And it's kind of one of those things that I had to make the decision that that's not what I was going to do. I had all the excuses for that to be the end result, but I wasn't going to accept those excuses. And so it was kind of like, I didn't want to hear that I had no money, and I didn't want to hear that, you know, all I had was my GED and, you know, where I was supposed to be. It didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was my attitude about where I wanted to be and how hard I was willing to work to get there. And I think that everybody has that inside of them. And it's one of the reasons that I get frustrated with people, you know, and I'll, you know, it's my biggest pet peeve when people will say to me, you know, I had somebody comment on a blog post years ago, and they said, oh, well, it must be real easy when you have, you know, this whole audience, you know, this audience, you know, big audience. And I was like, I didn't start with a big audience. There was no big audience store, you know, that I went in and I said, I'll take 5,000 of those. You know, everybody starts from the same spot. And so it's a big hot point for me when, you know, people want to give the, you know, the excuses, their situation, why they can't go out and get what they want in life because they have, you know, a situation. Whereas I kind of look at it like, exactly like I said, you know, your attitude determines everything. Yeah. And I've said that if you are not where you want to be in life, you need to look in the mirror, because the person who's responsible for that is you, not everybody around you, and not the things that happen to you, and, you know, not your past and not your situations. Yeah. It's your attitude.
So here's an interesting conversation around this, because I've had similar conversations with people, right? And it's pretty easy, like sitting from where we're sitting. You know, if you're in a room to be in a position to have a conversation with one of us, or if you're like in a position to be watching this on a screen somewhere,
right? On
some level, you're already pretty seriously blessed. Not that you can react with us, but you have the income and the access to technology and this and that. You know, and then in those scenarios, I completely agree with you. And then somebody said to me once, like, so you're telling me that like the kid who's starving in a village, like in South Africa. I'm like, okay, there are exceptions.
Yes.
Okay, but you don't live your life. You know, so they're looking to that kid as an excuse to not do what they want, but they're not that kid.
Well, and exactly like you said, that unfortunately, very unfortunately, that child in the village is never going to see this message, you know, to, you know, I guess lacks the inspiration, lacks the examples, etc., to kind of know that they could achieve huge success. But you know, like you said, anybody that's able to watch this and is able to comprehend it, and to be honest with you, anybody that lives in a first world country, especially, you know, to me, there's pretty much no acceptable excuse as to why you don't have what you want in life.
So the next thing you shared was, it's possible to say nothing and influence everything.
So in the 15 years that CJ was on this earth, he never said anything. You know, he would babble consonants like ba, 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 ba over and over again, but he never said an actual word, and yet he had such a huge impact on my life. And as a result of having an impact on my life, anybody that I helped, you know, in that circle surrounding me, he had an impact on their life. And then anybody from that circle who went and spread it on. And so that's why I often call it a ripple effect. And one of the things that I learned in that respect was, no matter what you say, who you are says a lot to people. So it's kind of like, you can be hugely successful. You can be super smart. You can have a lot of money. But if you're a jackass, that's what people see, and you don't need to speak as one, and you don't, but if that's how you act. And so I kind of look at it like, he was such strength despite the fact that he never said anything, that it's just kind of, you know, what I took away from him and what I knew I had to do and what I had to emulate. And I think that who he was as a person, just the fact that he was, you know, kind and innocent and completely pure and things along those lines, it emanated from him. And I think that that does from a lot of people. So I just think that your actions speak very, very loudly, even if you don't use any words. So I try and remember that as much as I can in my personal life and in my professional life, that you know, it doesn't matter what I'm blogging or what I'm telling people to do. It's what I'm doing that they're kind of, you know, that kind of has the bigger impact.
Yeah, it was interesting. I actually I didn't know about CJ's death until I didn't see the original post that you wrote, and then a couple months ago, I was poking around some stuff that you were writing, and you wrote something in response to somebody who took something that you said and basically like misinterpreted it, and it was like,
that happens a lot.
Yeah, and you went like line by line and said, let me tell you why, and it was, I mean, besides eviscerating this person, you know, it's like, I think what tends to happen so often also is, especially in the digital world now, when you have a screen between people, is that we lose our minds, you know, and the way that we would treat people, you know, beyond speaking to them, just the way that we treat people. If they're not right in front of us, there's a humanity that seems to be slipping away, you know, and it's always like, you know, would you act that way to somebody if you were in front of them with their kids standing next to them?
Yeah, you know, I will tell you that. So years and years and years ago, I did a site clinic. And so when we do a site clinic, we're doing live reviews of sites at a conference. We do live reviews of sites, and you know, there are 400 people in the room, and you're looking at one specific guy's site. So it's kind of like, you need to have a little bit of comedy or banter or something in there to keep the attention of all these people who don't own the site. And so, you know, we did then, and I typically play the bad cop, shocking, I know, in the site clinics. And so, you know, I'm usually, and I make it very clear that I'm joking. Over the years, I've kind of learned when when I'm in, you know, when I'm getting close to the line of, this isn't fun for you, so I'm going to back off, you know, but I'm very clear at the beginning of the session, like, hey, we may poke a little bit of fun at you, but, you know, we're just trying to keep everybody interested. And so this guy goes home and writes a post about his experience at this conference, and it was the first time that he went. And he gets this paragraph, and he said something along the lines of, and as for you, Ray Hoffman, in parentheses, he said, I had to even look up your name, ha. And he just does this entire paragraph essentially about what a bitch I am, and how like horrible I was to this guy in the site review clinic, you know, blah, blah, blah. And so, you know, I kind of contacted the guy afterwards, and apparently a few other people did on my behalf, unbeknownst to me. But I had contacted the guy afterward, and I said, what you don't see is that I give a business card to every single person whose site we ream through and tell them, you know, email me when you get home. I'll give you some, you know, solid advice and bullet points that you can go through for being such a good sport. And so, you know, he wrote this whole, and I mean, it was really scathing. Like, he didn't call me the word that no woman ever wants to be called, but there was like a paragraph, you know, beating around the bush about it. And so 2 years later, I'm at a conference, and I'm standing outside. I was actually here in New York, and I'm standing outside, and I hear this guy introduce himself to another guy. And he said his screen name, and my head whipped around, and like 3 people that were with me all backed up. I turned around and I said, what's your name again? And he introduced, and he had his hand out and he introduced himself. And he goes, what's your name? And I was like, Ray Hoffman. And he immediately took it back. And he was like, you know, I didn't know, like, I had no idea you were actually a nice person. I didn't realize, you know, that was your shtick during the site clinics. And I just kind of looked, but it was amazing that it just made me think of that, because online he was so quick to just make the most awful comments about me. And the second he was in front of my face, you know, not willing to make those same comments or judgments.
Amazing how that changes things.
I do think the internet makes people act like asshats sometimes. And I mean, but I don't think it's specific to the internet. I think that when you call a utility company and you are pissed, I think you're more likely to scream at the rep over the phone than you would be if you went down to the office. I mean, I think that that's an age-old thing, but I think the internet makes it much easier, and I think the internet makes it much easier to be anonymous and do that.
Right, exactly. And that's the scariest thing, I think.
Yeah.
Anyway, so let's kind of jam back to what you had shared. So you'll never know what you're capable of until you try.
Yeah, I always say that if you had asked me, you know, if you had told me 16 years ago, you're going to be the CEO of a marketing agency, I would have laughed my ass off at you. You know, back then I was aiming to get a job at like a fancy restaurant where the average tabs were, you know, a little higher than Pizza Hut, to get, you know, my better cut of the 15-20%. So I didn't know if I could do this. Like, you know, I definitely did not sit down at the kitchen table and go, okay, here's my foolproof marketing plan, you know, for starting an affiliate marketing, and I'm absolutely going to be able to achieve this goal, this goal. You know, I didn't have a plan. I didn't know for sure if I could do it. As a matter of fact, I probably had a lot more reasons why I probably couldn't do it. But you know, there's a quote by Eminem that I say all the time, and I apologize, but in one of his songs he says, "Success was my only motherfucking option, failure's not." And that's kind of the way that I looked at it. Was I had nothing to lose, that was for sure. And so I always just look back and go, if I had listened to everybody else, like my family when I first started, you know, doing, they'd come over, are you playing on the computer? And it's like, no, I'm not playing on a computer. I'm building a website and building backlinks. You know, but it was a matter of like, if I had gone based on what I thought I could do, I'd probably still be, you know, I probably would be sitting at home in bonbons, you know, watching the talk shows. But you know, you have no idea what you are capable of until you actually try and do it. And if you fail at it, then there was something to be learned from it. That's going to help you in the next thing that you try to do.
And so many people, I'm sure you've had similar conversations. I've had so many conversations with people where they're having the entire conversation in their head about why they should or shouldn't do something. And they're arguing both sides in their head, sometimes for months, sometimes for years. And they're like, well, what should I do? And I'm like, step one, stop having the conversation in your head and just do something in the world, you know, so that you may be wrong. This may be a horrible decision. You may bomb quickly.
Right.
But then bomb quickly. You know, go out into the world, take some action, and start to respond to data instead of self-talk. You know, because then you'll know. And if you fail, and then you recover, and then you move on, and you figure it out from there. Or if you succeed, then you end up 16 years later, you know, like running a marketing agency.
Yeah, and I mean, it's, you know, I call it analysis paralysis, where it's just like you're so busy trying to figure out, can you do this? What happens if you do this and that happens? And it's kind of like, you know, going back to number 11, you want the plan. Well, guess what? The plan is not going to go off as a given anyway, or, you know, exactly as you plan it out anyway. So it's a matter of just get out there and try and fail. And, you know, one of the best marketing books that I think I've read, you know, in the last decade was Seth Godin's The Dip. And
short, but so good.
So, you know, you're almost pissed.
That's that one thing that everybody struggles with. Yeah.
But you're almost pissed. You get this book and you look at it and you're like, seriously? Like, are you kidding me? This is like a pamphlet. No, but, you know, I read it, and just the logic, and it's so simple, but the logic of just decide what your quitting point is before you start to do it, so that you know it's not an emotional, I quit, this is too tough, but that it's an actual, nope, I said if it ever got to this point, you know, I would back away and try something else. And so I just, like, I am such a big believer of just get out there and try it, because I sure as hell never thought I'd be able to do this.
So I'm preaching to the choir over here. I totally agree. The next thing you shared was that other people's opinions don't matter. And you've certainly manifested this in a pretty major way in your career.
Yeah, you know, it's one of those things, you know, and I think people that didn't know the backstory for a long time, you know, I would just take stuff on the fact that, you know, I wasn't PC, I had no filter, you know, you shouldn't, you know, big one I got, you shouldn't use the F word. And I'm like, are you new here? But, you know, it's kind of like, all these people seem to care what other people think. And I think, you know, I had to learn the hard way. And it was a very hard lesson to learn. I mean, embarrassment is a very big, it's like a paralyzing thing, the fear of being embarrassed. You know, for some people it's a minor fear. They're scared to get up and do karaoke, so they never do karaoke in their entire life, even though they secretly want to get up there, you know, and kind of belt off some karaoke. And I think that, you know, when I had CJ, and, you know, I've told this story before, but we were in a grocery store, and we were standing at a deli counter, and there's a woman standing probably like 5 feet from me, and she looks over, and CJ's in his wheelchair, and he ate through a permanent G-tube in his stomach because he couldn't eat by mouth, and so he's got this little pump that's like, and it like puts a little drop into him, and so it does this continuously. And she kind of like looked, and she looks over to her husband, like, one, did not hide the disgust on her face, two, did not hide the disgust in her voice. And she looked at her husband and said loud enough for me to hear, can you believe she brought him in here? And I kind of like looked over, and I'm thinking, fuck you. You know, and screw it, you think of him, you know, like, and I mean, I've seen people, you know, that have like swan dived to prevent, you know, his chair from brushing up against them. You know, you kind of lose the fear of embarrassment when you're standing in the middle of the mall and your kid like projectile vomits, you know, in the center of the mall. You kind of learn to not be as embarrassed, you know, and you're forced to. And I think that's, embarrassment is a hurdle that a lot of people are not forced to overcome. So they let that fear of failing, that fear of being embarrassed, that fear of not succeeding at something kind of pull them back. Whereas I kind of learned, like, you know, hey, you in the mall staring at me right now, like, you don't go home with me, so I really could give two shits what you think about what's going on right now. And I think that made me much more willing to take chances. And I think too that, you know, the more visible you get in any community, I don't care if you're a recipe blogger, I don't care if, you know, I'm a marketing blogger, you know, I don't care who you are or what industry you're in, the more visible that you are, the more people are going to come out of the woodwork and try and cut you down, because there are just some people out there that's how they try and build themselves up. And, you know, I think realizing that other people's opinions didn't matter saved me a lot of stress. Like, I probably added 4 years onto my life. You know, and it was something that took me a while to learn, but just understanding that, you know, and I put this in a separate post where I had said, you know, unless they sit around your Thanksgiving table, their opinion of you, of the new business venture that you did, of my last speech, their opinion of this interview, at the end of the day, does not mean jack shit to my opinion of myself, you know, or to how I view things. Yeah. So what matters is what I see. And my immediate family, I am definitely not suggesting that if you're going to do something, you know, that's, you know, going to land your wife in jail, that you only think about yourself. But I mean, outside of your immediate family, the only person, you know, nobody else's opinion matters. And allowing yourself to be paralyzed by the fear of what they're going to think. Who cares what they think? Because that guy on the subway that you're so worried about, you know, what he thinks, you're never going to see him again. And so I wish, you know, out of almost all of them that I wrote, I think that was one that took me the longest time to understand. And I think learning that one was one of the ones that made me the most free in regards to how I do business.
And that's maybe the one that hits home most with me also, because that's a struggle that I still have. That's
really?
Yeah, no, totally. And I've talked to a lot of people. I mean, and it's funny because actually, was this a post that you started by referencing Julian's post?
Yes.
Yeah, so and Julian's a friend of mine, and we've had this whole conversation. And I have a public voice, and I have a voice that I use with my friends and my family and stuff like that. And from a value standpoint, from like a who I am standpoint, it's the same. But in terms of like the language I'll actually use, I filter. And part of it is, you know, like, is there a business reason for it? But then part of it like always has me asking, well, is there some sort of embarrassment, or people won't accept me for the real me if I go out there. And it's a dance that I would love to say, I'm done with this, I figured it out, locked and loaded, I got my mess. But it's something that I still I'm like in the middle of this interesting dance. And I know that it affects me, it affects my business, it affects my ability to connect with certain people in the way that I want to connect them with.
I think, I think the struggle for me personally came from, I think there's not caring what other people think. I'm conscious of other people's feelings. I don't care what they think about what I do. And I think that there are some people that it comes across, there are some people where it's just real and it's just who they are. And I think that's a very important aspect of it too. I mean, in business, that may not be the real you. Does that make sense? Like, kind of like, you may actually have those two sides. And like you said, at the end of the day, your sentiment is the same, but how you express that is different. And like, I always joke that I don't have that filter in my head that, and it was one of those things somebody said to me one time, it's very rare that I make it through a session, at a conference without dropping one word that I somehow should not be dropping. And it's a funny thing because I always tell people, I don't have that filter where I go, oh, I'm going to use curse. Oh no, I shouldn't use that curse word here. I'm like, it just comes out. So I also don't have that filter to go, don't use a curse word here. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I don't know. I think there are some people that, as long as the sentiment's the same, as long as you're not pretending to be something that you're not. But I mean, for some people, if you're comfortable one way personally and you're comfortable one way in business, as long as you're comfortable. Now, if you're acting a way in business that makes you uncomfortable, but it's what you perceive that other people expect you to be,
right,
that I would be much more concerned about. But I think some people are just, more comfortable with taking a different approach in business than they do necessarily in their personal life.
To me, it's always like, it always comes back to, like, what are your core values? Like, what's the essence of who you are? And are you honoring that in every part of your life? And then for me, it's like, so I filter some of my language or the way that I may sort of like express myself in certain parts of my life, but I don't filter my ideas. I don't filter the essence of who I am.
Right.
And I think that's sort of like the bigger thing. Anyway, let's jam. We're going to be here for like hours because there's so much. We could just keep talking. So you can't change the past, but you can help shape the future.
Yeah, I mean, there's no point looking backwards. What's done is done. Past set in stone. It's kind of like I look back and I can't go back and change the fact that he had a stroke. I can try and make sure that more children and families don't go through what we did in the future. So that's one of the reasons why I do the stroke walk for the American Heart Association every year, and it's one of the reasons that I try and raise money for them, because I want to try and make sure that this doesn't happen to other kids. I can't change that it happened to my son, but I can try and make sure that it doesn't happen to other people. One of the things that I try and get across to people, and Missy Ward, who owns Affiliate Summit, right, is a real big inspiration to me in this regard, is if you are lucky enough to find financial success, or if you are lucky enough to find internet fame, and I say fame because only we know who we all are, but use your voice and use it to help change the future. Yeah. Pick a cause, pick a belief. I don't care what your cause is, but try and use your voice to do some good and help shape the future, because you can't change anything that occurred in the past. No, I totally agree with that. Self-education is one of the best ways to empower yourself. Yeah, I always joke that having my son gave me more of an education than 4 years of formal education ever could have given me. When my son was first diagnosed, we were in the hospital for 5 weeks, they find all the brain damage, they come back and they tell me, we want to put a feeding tube in him. And he was still eating from a bottle at this point, and I said, well, why do you want to put a feeding tube in him? They said, well, because eventually he's going to stop eating. Okay, and if you've never had somebody that's gone through a lot of medical treatment in your life, your first instinct is they're doctors. They know everything. Like, whatever they say is the best thing that you should be doing. And I went back to Ronald McDonald House, and I was kind of upset. I told the parents they were putting the G-tube in, the other parents that were there. One of the mom goes, well, doesn't he eat by mouth? And I said, yeah. And she goes, well, then tell him to wait. And I said, I can do that? Like, I had no idea that I could even, you know, have any input into the decisions that were being made. And she brought me out this book called Children with Cerebral Palsy, A Parent's Guide. And, you know, I kind of read that, and like the amount of stuff that it taught me was insane. You know, and anything that I needed to learn about his condition, you know, he ended up with catastrophic epilepsy, which means that despite the fact that he was on 4 seizure medications every day, he still had seizures every day. And, you know, so I learned everything I could about that and tried to figure out, you know, found out that lavender supposedly, you know, helps calm that and things along those lines. And I kind of took that same approach in business. If I needed to learn HTML, I took an online course that taught it for me. When I needed to learn about being an entrepreneur, I read stuff like The E-Myth Revisited, which love that book. And, you know, when I needed to learn how to run a company, I tried, I made mistakes, I learned from my mistakes. And, you know, just basically try to take, you know, and I've said it a few times before in this interview, just try and take everything as a learning experience to teach you what not to do wrong the next time.
Yeah, and it's amazing how much learning is within our grasp for very little money, and especially in the online world these days, you can literally learn. I mean, with the MOOCs, and now you've got like top college courses that are available to you now if you really want it for free.
Exactly.
It's really incredible. So your top 3 here were your biggest setback can either break you or fuel you. It's up to you.
Yeah, and I think that was, you know, it's probably a little unfair because that was probably an extension or a summary of some of the other ones combined. But, you know, like I said, it's just you have 2 choices, fight or curl up in a ball and cry. And I'm a big believer in fighting, you know, because life is always going to come back no matter. You'll think that you faced everything, you know, that just you have beat every challenge and you have overcome every mountain, and then you'll get around the corner and you'll be like, you know what, I'm happy with life, and life will be like, hold on one second, I got something for you. And you know, after CJ, you would think, okay, like I've had my share of challenges, right? You know, I went through everything that happened with his stroke. You know, went through an experience I'm very thankful for of being his mom, but one that was, you know, very heartbreaking at times for him. You know, and went through his passing away, and it's like, you know, okay, like I've made like that. It's over now. You know, he is in a better place somewhere. And it's kind of like, you know, that huge challenge that life threw at me, like I survived it. And then 4 months later, I'm in a doctor's office listening to a doctor tell me that my 2-year-old has autism. And so, you know, you're like, are you kidding me? And so you're always going to have a new challenge, you know, and you just, I've had people that'll say, you know, oh, well, you know, I've been dealing with some stuff. It's not as heavy as what you've dealt with. And I'm thinking, you know, well, there's a lot of parents out there that have dealt with stuff that's even heavier than what I've dealt with, you know, people that have dealt with things, you know, much, much worse. And so it's kind of like, you know, there's always going to be something else. So you've got to decide whether you're going to let it break you or whether you're going to fight back. Because if you let it break you, it's not like it's ever going to be lifted, or that challenge will melt away into the background and no new challenges will come. It's like you have to make that decision to fight back from the get-go.
Yeah. So you can survive everything or anything.
Yeah. You asked me how you digest, you know, his diagnosis. Like when they first came in, like I will never forget his voice. Nope, that's what's left. You know, when I had mentioned the white spots on the MRI. And I sure as hell didn't think, like, I thought I was gonna die. I really, like, I went to bed at night just thinking, if there was a God, I would not wake up the next morning because this was just too hard. Like, there was no way that I was gonna be able to get through this. And, you know, all of the struggles that he had through his whole life. And then when he passed away, you know, for that first 45 minutes, I was sure as could be. Like, I don't remember what that old show was, but the show where Red's always grabbing his chest and swearing he's coming up. Sanford and Son. But you know, like I swore like I was just gonna drop dead right there, because it feels like life could not get any worse, and that you can't make it through it. And I think everybody comes across those times, whether it be losing a parent, losing a loved one, losing a child. You know, everybody comes across things in their lives where they think like, you know, no, there's just no way I'm going to survive this. Life is never going to be okay again. You know, and you can survive it. You know, I was able to survive his diagnosis. I was able to survive his passing. I'm going to be able to survive my youngest son's diagnosis. You know, and I'm going to be able to survive all the challenges he's going to come across, you know, as a result of him having autism in the future. And it's one of those things that no matter what comes up, you just have to push forward, because you will survive. Like, whether you fight or give up and just let life take over, either way, you're still going to be there tomorrow, you know, in most cases. So it's just kind of like, you're going to survive. So kind of coupled with that, with the one before of how do you want to react to it? Because either way, you're going to survive the situation. You can survive it in a better place, or you can survive it and wallow in it. But I am an absolute big believer that you need to just forge through any situation, because no matter how bleak it might seem, you absolutely will survive it.
Right. And I think also, you know, people see you sitting here like fairly like passionate about what you're saying, but also like almost like, well, why isn't she crying? Why isn't she? And so I want to make clear, it's like what you're not saying is you don't get emotional about things. It's not, you're not saying don't feel it. Oh. You're saying feel it, get emotional about it, embrace it, but find the way through. And not like that's an easy thing either.
Right.
It's like, you're not giving short shrift. I'm sure that's not what you're saying.
No, it's you know, I'm definitely not saying, you know, like I said, when he was diagnosed, you know, I cried like crazy. I would go back to Ronald McDonald House and I would literally just punch the bed. You know, and I found out that my youngest had autism. Absolutely cried, like, you know, just that he was going to have to go through that. And having already had a special needs child, I kind of have an inkling into what kind of challenges he's going to face, and I didn't want that for him. And so I think that, again, I'm a doer. It's kind of like, you know, when CJ passed away, my first thought was, okay, I've got to plan the funeral. Okay, there's people flying in. You know, I said it was like hosting a really bad party, because you have people from like all over the place that don't know each other, and you're trying to make sure people feel comfortable. And at the same time, you know, you're in the middle of a funeral. And I think I keep myself so busy. And a week later, I was answering emails for work, and people were responding to me, and they were like, you know, no, don't worry about this. You know, you can wait a few weeks. And it was just like, no, that's how I function. So, and then 3 weeks before his birthday, you know, just all of a sudden thought about the fact that his birthday was coming up in 3 weeks, and I was a mess for 24 hours. I think that I absolutely do allow myself to feel it. I just try at this point to allow myself to feel it in constructive ways. So rather than allowing it to take over my whole life, when it builds up on me, or when I feel like, you know, I've had more than I can take today, it's kind of like I'll give myself that break, and I'll give myself the, you know, 2 or 3 hours to cry, or to kind of, you know, at the universe. But I just make sure that I know there's a stop time on that. You know, there at some point, you know. It's
actually really similar, like in Judaism, when somebody dies, like you sit Shiva for a fixed window of time, and you know, and you embrace the sadness, and you embrace the feeling, and people come to you and take care of you. But it's a fixed window, and the idea is that you just really feel it. You really feel it, but at the same time, you set a time where you say, okay, it's time to sort of, like, I don't leave it behind, I don't leave the person behind or the memory, but you feel everything that you need to feel, and you'll revisit that, I'm sure, but you sort of like, you set a date where you say, okay, now I need to start to figure out how I'm going to get on with my life. Just kind of like a similar sentiment. So we've gone like way longer than we had planned. And now, I mean, it's great. Like, I mean, such a powerful story. I mean, such a powerful presence, such a powerful woman, and like so many great ideas and things for people who are struggling in so many different ways. And just to see your example of strength is so inspiring. So I appreciate that. So the name of this project is the Good Life Project. So when I offer that term to you, to live a good life, it comes out. What does that mean to you?
I think for me, living a good life is living life on your terms and kind of accepting what you have and making the best of it, and living life to have your version of success versus anybody else's version of success. You know, I always joke that, like, you know, I'm a redneck girl. I absolutely, like, I was not made for the downtown Manhattan scene. And, you know, for me, time wealth has always been more important than actual money wealth. And so I tell people that's my version of success. And I did a post, there are no damn silver spoons, I think was the name of the post. And I had said in there that, you know, my idea of success was not flying first class. It wasn't, you know, private jets or going to expensive nightclubs. You know, I have 35 pairs of jeans. Like, you know, it's kind of like that, you know, everybody has their own things that make them happy. And I think, to me, living a good life is being able to identify what's going to make you happy, what you need to do to get to the point where you're happy, and committing yourself to doing it, and getting there, because, you know, life is short. I mean, in the general, you know, I think about it, I'm 36. Like, I'm pretty sure I'm 18 getting ready to turn 19. Mm-hmm. And it's just kind of like, you know, you're only here once as far as we know. And you just kind of need to find your own personal happiness and do what it takes, you know, providing you're not hurting anybody else, do whatever it takes to get to that happiness. And so I think that everybody has a different version of what their good life is. You know, for me, it's 40 acres in the middle of nowhere with cows and chickens. I swear, I'm not joking you. And so, you know, that's where I'm headed with my good life. And I just hope to be able to impart some knowledge on some other people, and you know, build a company and give very talented people a home where they earn money and their talents are valued, and be able to do all that while I'm sitting out on my farm with my cows and my chickens. Mm-hmm. So
love it. Beautiful. Thank you so much for hanging out today.
Thank you.
It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So my guest today has been Ray Hoffman. I'm Jonathan Fields, signing off for Good Life Project.